Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Jack, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Nice to see you. So first, I want to get your reaction to the Supreme Court's decision today on the Louisiana redistricting case that further restricts the Voting Rights Act and the use of race when it comes to drawing congressional maps.
Well, today's decision from the Supreme Court, I think, vindicates the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. It also vindicates the 15th Amendment, the right to vote, and the principle that the court decided the case upon today is that government should not be discriminating based on race. That is a principle we fought a civil war over, and it is a principle that is a foundational principle of equality. I think the Supreme Court's right. This business of divvying voters up by race is a sordid business, and it is a business that is directly contrary to the protections of the Constitution that prevent government from being in the race business.
What do you say to some African Americans and Latinos who are expressing concerns that they may not receive fair representation in the future?
Well, look, the people expressing concerns are Democrats because Democrats have made it their business to be engaged in racial discrimination, and they advocate racial discrimination. They advocate quotas. By the way, the Democrats who are saying that, they don't actually fight for the interest of Hispanics. They don't fight for the interest of African Americans. So, for example, I authored and passed into law the most far-reaching federal school choice program that has ever been enacted. It is going to allow for tens of billions of dollars of new scholarships to flow into Texas and all across this country, giving Hispanic and African American kids in failing schools the opportunity to get a scholarship and get a great education. Every single Democrat opposed that. By the way, every poll that is done of Hispanic parents or African American parents, you see 60, 70, sometimes as much as 80% of the parents support school choice, and yet the Democrats, they're in the business of discriminating based on race, and when it comes to education, they care more about the money from the teachers' unions than they do about the kids actually learning to read and write. And so I understand that partisan Democrats are unhappy because one of the ways they get Democrats elected is by discriminating based on race. I would suggest a better way to get elected is to campaign on issues the voters actually care about.
The Supreme Court also this week finalized the 2025 Texas maps for use in the 2026 midterms. But as I understand it, the case is going to go back to the district court and will still be heard have a trial, likely sometime next year. What impact do you think today's Louisiana ruling by the Supreme Court will have on this Texas case going forward?
So I don't know that it will have a significant impact on the Texas case. That will be litigated. The Louisiana case is more likely to have an impact in other states that may be contemplating redistricting. And they may make the decision to move away from racially gerrymandered seats that had been put in place previously. I think that's a good thing, to move away from districts that are drawn based on race. The Supreme Court is right that the Constitution protects all of us regardless of race, and moving towards a colorblind society is a good thing. You know, you asked a minute ago about Hispanics and African Americans. I'll point out I'm the first Hispanic senator ever elected from the state of Texas. And in 2024, my reelect, I won Hispanic statewide by six points. Now, when you're running statewide, you can't have a gerrymandered district. My lines are the lines of the state of Texas. But if you run on an agenda that resonates with voters broadly, my number one priority is jobs, 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 jobs. And that ended up with my being reelected with 1 million votes statewide and winning a majority of Hispanics. And also, for the first time in 100 years, flipping the Rio Grande Valley from blue to red. That's a big deal. And you get that by delivering real results.
2026 may be different this year as far as the midterms are concerned, based on historical purposes. But I wanted to ask you, there have been 2 new polls out just in the last couple of days here in Texas that show State Representative James Talarico ahead of both Senator Cornyn and Attorney General Ken Paxton in the Senate race. What do you make of those?
Well, listen, I'm concerned about the midterms, and I'm concerned about Texas. I don't believe at the end of the day Democrats are going to win statewide in Texas in 2026.
Why not?
But it's a real fight because I think the values of Texans are fundamentally conservative. I think the policies that we're following in Texas are working: low taxes, low regulation, securing the borders. I think James Tallarico, his policy positions are really extreme. They're out of step with common sense Texans. I don't think Texans want to see open borders. They don't want to see violent criminals and gangbangers and murderers released from jail. And sadly, that's where today's extreme Democrats are. I will say this also, Jack. I've never seen a time when there's a greater divide between the substantive policy victories and public perception. I look back to the last year of what has been accomplished with President Trump in office and a Republican Senate and a Republican House. I've never seen a year when we've accomplished more in my entire lifetime than this past year. Big historic victories. And yet there's a real disconnect between the victories that we've won and the public perception. And I do agree, the left is really angry. They're agitated. They hate Donald Trump. They're motivated to show up. And a lot of other folks don't yet know the victories we've won. So, for example, a big mandate of the 24 election is secure the border. Well, illegal border crossings have dropped more than 99%. That's produced real results. The murder rate nationwide has gone down 20%. The number of people dying every year due to drug overdoses has gone down 20%. When you remove violent murderers and drug traffickers from the streets, fewer people are murdered and fewer people die of drug overdoses. There are literally tens of thousands of Americans who are alive because of our success securing the border. You look at the working families tax cut that we passed last year. It's the biggest tax cut in history. It includes new tax cuts like no tax on tips. I'm the author of No Tax on Tips. There are millions of waiters and waitresses and bus drivers and taxi cab drivers and bartenders and barbers and hairstylists who are seeing real tax relief. You look at no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, no tax on car loans. All of those are giving real relief to people who need it. And then on top of that, the two most consequential elements in that bill were, number one, school choice, which you and I talked about a minute ago, and number two, the Trump accounts. Both of those provisions I authored. I wrote the school choice provision. I wrote the Trump accounts. Under the Trump accounts, every child in America is going to get a personal investment account. Newborn kids will have it seeded with $1,000. Parents and family and employers can give up to $5,000 a year that'll be invested in the stock market, which means every kid in Texas and every kid in America will experience the miracle of compound growth, and we will create a whole new generation of capitalists. Those are historic victories. But I think right now, many of the voters have not yet heard and understood those victories.
But isn't the problem that because prices are still high when it comes to just, you go to the grocery store, et cetera, there's insurance, all those costs, healthcare, et cetera, and wages, while they've gone up some, haven't gone up enough to where people feel better about their own personal economic situation?
Listen, affordability is a very real concern. And the reason it is so painful is we had 4 years of very high inflation under Joe Biden. And when President Trump came in and Republicans came in, we've seen the inflation rate drop dramatically. But that just means the rate of increases has slowed down. It doesn't mean we've gone back to where we were before Biden. Listen, the Democrats went on a multi-trillion-dollar spending spree that drove up costs. We are seeing real concrete, we're seeing the inflation rate has been slashed, but there's no doubt people are concerned about affordability, which is why my focus, I just mentioned the tax cuts. Let's take no tax on seniors. We just had April 15th tax day. More than 30 million Americans filed for no tax on seniors. The average deduction was over $7,500. That's real money in the pockets of real Texans who are hurting. And those tax cuts are delivering real and meaningful relief. We need to keep doing more, but those victories are significant. And it's a marked contrast to the absolute policy disaster we saw when Democrats were in charge.
I want to ask you about the third assassination attempt on President Trump. I know the president has praised the Secret Service for protecting him and everybody in that room, in the ballroom at the hotel the other night. But I also read that reporters who attended said they didn't have to go through metal detectors. They didn't have their tickets checked against a master list. They didn't have their IDs checked. And so when you hear that, what goes through your mind?
Well, listen, I am grateful the Secret Service stopped this attempted assassin. This is the third attempted assassination of Donald Trump in the last 2 years, and it is horrific. I think the questions you're raising are reasonable questions. Anytime you have an event, it is reasonable to ask, how could it have been better secured? If you look back to the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the shooter was on top of a roof with a sniper rifle and shot President Trump, hit him in the ear, there were clear and massive security failures there. That was completely unacceptable. In this case, the questions you're asking, I think a lot of people are asking, what could be done to make that more secure? Now, I will note that this assassination attempt happened 70 days into a shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security because the Democrats 16 times have voted against funding the Department of Homeland Security. Those Democrats who were hiding under the tables and fearing for their lives were being protected by Secret Service agents. The same Secret Service agents that they voted 16 times not to pay their paychecks. This Democrat-led DHS shutdown is reckless and it's endangering Americans. And I will say also, Jack, the rhetoric from Democrats demonizing President Trump, calling for violence. Just this week, Hakeem Jeffries, the lead Democrat in the House, did a press conference calling for maximum warfare against Trump every day, all the time. That is reckless and dangerous. And we saw a deranged leftist on Saturday hear that message. He wrote a manifesto that made clear he was an angry leftist, and his objective was to murder President Trump, to murder Vice President Vance, and to murder as many members of the Trump cabinet as possible. For the Democrats that keep using this extreme rhetoric, they need to stop. Political violence is always, always wrong. It is unacceptable. And yet we're seeing Democrats doubling down on the angry violence. When you call your political opponents Adolf Hitler day after day after day, when you call them Nazis and Klansmen, that has the predictable effect of enraging extreme left violent activists. And we're seeing violence tragically resulting over and over again.
I've got some more topics, but I did have one other question to ask you, and that is President Trump says he wants the ballroom to be completed at the White House. A federal judge stopped that, saying it needs congressional approval, that the president didn't have the authority. A, do you agree with that? And B, where are you on this Senate Republican bill that's been proposed to provide $400 million of taxpayer money for that project?
Well, the good news is that that federal judge's decision was stayed on appeal, so it is not in effect. If you actually read that district judge's opinion, it was on its face ludicrous. So that federal judge concluded, said the administration has given no national security reason why there should be a secure ballroom that has bulletproof glass, that has a roof that is protected against drone attacks, that is secure and heavily armored. Well, this weekend provided compelling reason. If that ballroom were complete, that event could be held in the White House under much more secure scenarios. Given 3 assassination attempts, I think what President Trump is doing, building a secure ballroom where you can hold events, to be honest, President Trump will get to use the new ballroom very, very little. It will be completed very near the end of his term. What President Trump is doing is building a ballroom that will be used by subsequent presidents, both Democrat and Republican, for decades and hopefully even centuries to come. I will say also, no, there's no need to have taxpayer money for the ballroom, because the president has raised the money to build the ballroom from private contributions. And so not a penny of taxpayer dollars are going to that ballroom, even though it is very much a public use. It will be used by every president, by every administration, and having a secure location to have a large gathering will do a lot to reduce the risks of another assassination attempt like the one we saw this weekend.
And Senator, my last question to you, you've proposed Trey's law, a federal law to ban non-disclosure agreements that basically silence sex abuse victims from talking about what happened. Why is this so important? And I also know that there's now a House bill to go along with this.
Yeah, look, we tragically in this country have an epidemic of child sex abuse. A child is sexually abused in America every 9 minutes. 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused before she turns 18. I've spent my time in the Senate fighting consistently to protect kids and fighting against child sexual abuse. Trey's law is named for a Texan who went to a summer camp and tragically was sexually abused over and over and over again. And he filed litigation as a result of that abuse. And he signed a non-disclosure agreement that said he could not reveal the details of what happened to him. Trey tragically took his own life. He lived in the DFW area. He took his own life, crushed with the grief and the agony over what had happened to him, the sexual abuse that he had endured. Trey's law is simple, common sense, bipartisan legislation that says non-disclosure agreements cannot be enforced to silence a victim of child sex assault, that you have a right to tell your story. You have a right to speak out. Trey's law is bipartisan. I've written it along with Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York. This week, the Senate Judiciary Committee will be marking up Trey's law. I believe we're going to pass it out of judiciary. I think it is likely to be passed out of the committee unanimously. We're then going to pass it on the floor, pass it on the House, and we will put it on the president's desk for signature. Texas has already led. The state of Texas has a Trey's law in the state in Texas, but we're going to pass Trey's law nationally to protect children who are the victims, tragically, of child sex abuse.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack.
We appreciate it.